Thank you all for joining this talk on civil litigation for farmed animals, day 3, and you're all still here and looking pretty fit. That's exciting because I think this will be a very fun talk. Well, fun in a serious way. My name is Stien van der Ploeg. I'm the executive director at Animal Charity Evaluators, and I'm very happy to have an excuse not to network right now and learn more about Alene's achievements. I expect that most of you are quite familiar with the facts that 1, companies don't follow laws that aren't enforced, and 2, that prosecutors rarely enforce cruelty laws on factory farms, even when animal protection groups urge them to with very clear evidence. As a result, while several state cruelty laws technically cover farms, factory farms ignore them. And investigations in such states show rampant, unlawful neglect and abuse that I'm worried that you've probably also seen the evidence of. Strategic civil litigation offers a solution, and several little-known legal doctrines let plaintiffs sue in civil court for violation of a criminal law. And Alene here will explain how lawyers can systematically develop, refine, and use those doctrines to find factory farm cruelty. Alene is great if you get to know her personally. She's also very vibrant and smart. She went to Harvard Law here, actually. She's the founder of Legal Impact for Chickens and clerked for a federal judge and then started litigating for animals. She worked at PETA, at ALDF, that's the Animal Legal Defense Fund that you're probably familiar with. She was also at the Good Food Institute, and she is licensed to practice law in New York, in DC, and in California. Is that right? Okay. Alene is committed to helping chickens, also to honor the memories of her 2 beloved avian family members, Conrad and Zeke, who I would love for you to tell me more about later, maybe not on stage, but if you have questions for Alene, please put them in the swap card. There's also already some questions in there that you can upvote. Now, please welcome Alene Anello.
Hi, thank you all for coming today. Thank you for introducing me. So, as Stien mentioned, I'm going to talk about civil litigation for farmed animals. And I wanted to thank you so much to each of you for coming to learn about animal welfare and for caring about animals. And I wanted to thank the EA community in general. Thank you to the organizers of EAG for having me. And thank you to Jordan and Roberto and Stien and everybody that I'm forgetting to thank that helped with this. So, as you all know, animals feel pain, fear, and joy just like us. And yet each year, the US kills 9 billion chickens. And worldwide, that number is 70 billion. Most of these animals lead harsh, painful lives on factory farms. Therefore, improving conditions on farms would go a long way towards reducing suffering in this world. As Stien mentioned, criminal laws on the books are supposed to prohibit animal cruelty and neglect. Every single state has a law against animal cruelty and a law against neglect in the United States, as do Puerto Rico, DC, etc. I decided to put up the text from Massachusetts law. This is actually just an excerpt from Massachusetts law against animal cruelty, since we're here in Massachusetts, to illustrate what these laws look like and how strong they seem to be if you read the wording. So whoever drives, overdrives, overloads, drives when overloaded, overworks, tortures, torments, etc., an animal is committing the crime of cruelty in Massachusetts, where we are today. And if you read the whole thing, you'll see that it includes you can't inflict unnecessary cruelty on an animal. So if you've seen videos of factory farms and you've thought something looks like unnecessary cruelty, then probably that is illegal in Massachusetts. Also, it's illegal to fail to provide an animal someone owns with proper food, drink, shelter, and a sanitary environment. And if you know anything about factory farming and chicken slaughter, you probably know a lot of the animals don't have access to food or don't have access to water and die from thirst or dehydration. And a lot of them are kept in dirty environments that are not sanitary. So what I'm trying to illustrate with this is that the law written on the books actually looks pretty good. And I want to put a footnote in. A lot of people say, well, aren't there exemptions to the cruelty laws for agriculture? So yes, there are exemptions, but I think people overblow how much of the exemptions are the problem versus lack of enforcement being the real problem. So the reason I think that the exemptions are overblown are, first of all, 7 states, including Massachusetts, where we are right now, and California, which is a huge food producer, have no exemption to their cruelty law. So in Massachusetts, where we are now, anything illegal to do to a kitten in your house is illegal to do to a chicken on a factory farm. And if these exemptions were the problem, you'd expect that there would be no cruelty in Massachusetts or California or these other 5 states, but that's not the case, unfortunately. The other thing about the exemptions is even when there is an exemption, it won't be an absolute exemption for anything related to agriculture. It will be a limited exemption that's often surmountable. So common language would say customary animal agricultural practices are exempt. But when you think about what happens on today's factory farms, like breeding birds to grow so big, so fast that they can't stand, that's not customary. That's a kind of modern invention, and yet it happens. So that's why I think that we don't really need to think too much about the exemptions. The real problem, as Steen mentioned, is that police and prosecutors hardly ever enforce animal cruelty laws on factory farms. So even when animal advocates, well, first of all, police don't investigate factory farms to see how animals are being treated. So they don't go to the factory farm and check and see, is anyone suffering unnecessary cruelty? Does everyone have food and water? Then animal groups have to take that upon themselves. So animal advocates will do these extensive undercover investigations, go onto factory farms, get evidence of cruelty, turn the evidence over to the police. They'll give the police a memo saying, here's the statute, here's what happened, here's how what happened violates the statute. And still, with all that, police will usually not press charges and not make arrests. And they'll give different reasons for why they're not doing it, or they won't respond and won't give a reason at all. Then same thing with prosecutors. So even when animal groups then take all that evidence and turn it over to the prosecutor and say, well, the police aren't doing anything, but we have everything you need to prosecute, it's very rare for prosecutors to prosecute industrialized animal cruelty. And on the rare occasions when it is possible to get prosecutors and police to take action against large-scale industrialized cruelty, they usually just go against individual workers. So there might be a huge company that employs lots of workers and has lots of contract growers, and each of them have workers, and the problems that the animals are suffering from might be systemic problems that come all the way from the top. And yet, if there's any kind of prosecution, it'll just be one worker who really isn't the cause of the vast majority of the problems. And when that worker is put in prison, the problems will just continue as another worker will be hired and given the same instructions and placed under the same pressures. So prosecuting individual workers, first of all, it's rare. Second of all, it doesn't really solve the problem. At Legal Impact for Chickens, we believe that creative civil litigation offers a solution. There are several little-known laws that let somebody sue civilly for violation of a criminal law. So in the legal system, in the United States and in a lot of countries, there's 2 basic categories of law and of lawsuit. One is criminal and one is civil. These are overlapping categories, though, and they blend together, and it's not actually as simple as one versus the other. So criminal law is what you think about when there's a statute in the penal code saying you can't do X or you'll go to prison. And then if you do X, you might get arrested by police, and prosecutors working for the government might prosecute you, and you might go to prison. Civil law is usually referring to the kind of lawsuit that happens where one private party, usually not the government, sues another private party. So if I owe you money and I don't pay you, you might just sue me civilly and have a civil lawsuit. But there are times when these two concepts can be kind of blended together. So there are these little situations where a private plaintiff, such as maybe somebody who cares about animals, could sue in civil court and say, you're committing illegal animal cruelty, I want to make you stop. And that is what legal impact for chickens is focused on, because we see these criminal laws being violated and we don't see the government taking action as much as we want it to. So at LIC, we sue companies and executives that abuse animals on factory farms. The first lawsuit I want to tell you about is legal impact for chickens versus Case Farms. LIC is suing the KFC supplier Case Farms for crushing chicks to death and unnecessarily killing chicks and chickens, including by boiling them alive. Case Farms is a major U.S. U.S. chicken meat company that slaughters and kills 200 million chickens a year. And the nonprofit Animal Outlook did an investigation of Case Farms in 2021, which found really disturbing things. One of the things the investigation found was that at a Case Farms hatchery, when chicks are supposed to be moved along a conveyor belt, the conveyor belt would malfunction and would trap chicks and crush them. And those chicks would end up dying, and then they couldn't be used for food. They would just be a waste product. The investigation also found a piston that smashes into chicks' heads and crushes them to death that way. And these are violent, painful deaths that do not produce food. They're just waste. So Legal Impact for Chickens filed a lawsuit against Case Farms for animal cruelty in North Carolina's Burke County District Court. We were able to do this using a special law that North Carolina has called Chapter 19A, which just says anyone can sue anyone for animal cruelty. And that law was basically passed to solve the issue I was just telling you about, where animal cruelty is a crime, but the government doesn't always enforce it. And we were excited that after we filed the lawsuit, Animal Outlook, the organization that did the investigation, found out about it and wanted to join us as co-counsel. So they're now our co-counsel. As part of this lawsuit, we were able to do something called discovery, which is a process in civil litigation where either party can demand information from the other party. And so we asked Case Farms for information about instances where chicks were injured, harmed, maimed, or died. And Case Farms' response admitted that the company just doesn't keep records of those things. So this shows that Case Farms was not treating animal cruelty as an issue it needed to worry about at all. It was just a non-issue. Unfortunately, Case Farms filed a motion to dismiss in the case. And in its motion to dismiss, it argued that it was completely exempt from the cruelty law and that the cruelty law didn't apply to it at all based on one of the exemptions that I was just telling you about. So this was an exemption in North Carolina law for quote-unquote activities done for the quote-unquote purpose of producing food or poultry. And Case Farms basically said, we're a food company. Everything we do is an activity for the purpose of producing food or poultry. But we disagreed with that because, as I mentioned to you, each of the activities we're actually concerned about are things that don't produce food. There's things that just result in waste. And if Case Farms were to slow down, fix its broken machinery, hire more staff, it would actually be producing more food. So we don't think that that's a correct interpretation of the exemption, and we're excited to press the issue. Unfortunately, the lower court agreed with Case Farms and dismissed the case, so we are appealing it to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. We're very excited to be represented in the North Carolina Court of Appeals by an attorney who is named Dan Gibson, who regularly practices in that court and has won before in that court. And we're arguing to them that what I just said, that it's the activities Case Farms is doing that we're suing over are not food-producing activities. They're just laziness. So there's something that you may know of called an amicus brief, where anybody who wants to can weigh in on a lawsuit by submitting a brief to help give the judge advice about how the judge should rule, even if that person's not a party to the case. Apparently, it's short for amicus curiae, which is apparently Latin for friend of the court. So the idea is, I'm not on the plaintiff's side, I'm not on the defendant's side, I'm a friend of the court, and here's what I think. So we were very grateful that several entities and individuals submitted amicus briefs to support legal impact for chickens, and the chickens in this case. The most exciting one was by 3 organizations that advocate for farmers: the Northeast Organic Dairy Producers Alliance, the Cornucopia Institute, and Food Animals Concerns Trust. And this brief was really cool because it was written by a former North Carolina court appellate judge. So the judges that will be hearing our case used to work with her. And in their brief, they argued that defendants' alleged conduct is completely contrary to professional standards of modern poultry farming. So basically, what we're trying to say with this is, you don't need to crush chicks to produce food. That's not part of food production. We also were lucky enough to get an amicus brief supporting our perspective from multiple veterinarians and from a North Carolina animal rescue. So the current status of the case is we are waiting for the defendants to file their appellate brief in response, and we'll see what happens. Now, let's turn to Foster Farms. So I was talking to you earlier about undercover investigations and how they often reveal cruelty. So Legal Impact for Chickens sponsored an undercover investigation of Foster Farms, which is California's largest chicken meat producer. We paid that same nonprofit I mentioned earlier, Animal Outlook, to do the investigation and give us all the findings. And what they found was very disturbing. So again, this is in California, the state I mentioned that has no agricultural exemption to the cruelty law. So in California, you're supposed to treat chickens the same way you're supposed to treat a cat in your house. And yet the investigation found that Foster Farms was driving forklifts over chickens, sometimes killing them, but often just leaving them to suffer, throwing chickens, kicking chickens, that there were piles of dead chickens covered in maggots with other live chickens walking around on top of them. It was just a horrific scene that really feels like what would happen if somebody didn't care at all about animal welfare. And again, this is in a state with a very strong animal welfare law in theory. So, this is another disturbing image. If you want to see more, you can go to our website, legalimpactforchickens.org. And an extra concerning, but not surprising, maybe fact about it was that it wasn't just the workers. Managers and supervisors were also caught on camera kicking and throwing chickens. And the reason this is not surprising to me is that Foster Farms has a history of animal cruelty even before this investigation. So it makes sense that there would be problems coming from the top down. This is a quote from Animal Outlook. That's why it's in quotation marks. So animal cruelty is a crime. And so the Fresno County Sheriff's Department was contacted, and it put out a statement saying that it is looking into this, into an open investigation. We're really hoping that the government will do the right thing in this case and will look at the cruelty law, realize Foster Farms, this major corporation, is clearly violating it, and hold Foster Farms accountable. In the meantime, Foster Farms had a very interesting approach to hearing about all of its cruelty being exposed. It is trying to just throw its workers under the bus. So Foster Farms put out a statement saying that Foster Farms referred a few employees to Fresno County law enforcement, where they will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. Now, the weird thing about this, if any of you are lawyers, you might be thinking, wait a second, Foster Farms wants its employees prosecuted for something they did while working to make Foster Farms money? Wouldn't that mean Foster Farms is liable by respondeat superior? First of all, yes. Second of all, even if that wasn't the baseline rule, California has a very explicit law in the same section that talks about animal cruelty, which explicitly says that the knowledge and acts of an employee must be held to be the act and knowledge of the corporation. And if you read the full quote, it explicitly mentions animals. So this is what California is saying applies to animal cruelty. So I think maybe Foster Farms messed up a little bit by saying that. because the way that I read it, they're basically kind of acknowledging that they did do something wrong. And I think they're just hoping the government will try to go after the little guy instead of going after the people who caused everything. So we're currently waiting to hear how the government reacts. The next thing I want to talk to you about is actually Legal Impact for Chicken's first lawsuit. It's Smith versus Vacris, or the Costco case. This was a shareholder derivative case against Costco's executives for causing Costco to neglect and abandon chickens. A lot of people know Costco as a retailer, which it is, but it's also a chicken meat company because Costco is vertically integrated. So the company breeds and slaughters 100 million chickens a year that it then uses to sell in its stores. And Mercy for Animals did an undercover investigation in 2021 that showed that Costco was breeding its chickens to grow so big, so fast, that many of them couldn't stand up under their own weight. And then the animals who couldn't stand up couldn't reach food or water. And Costco didn't do anything about that. It just let the birds slowly die of dehydration and hunger. Now, you may remember earlier when we were talking about the animal cruelty laws, one of the things that animal cruelty laws and animal neglect laws pretty much always prohibit is depriving animals of food and water. So this to me seemed illegal. And so Legal Impact for Chickens represented 2 Costco shareholders and filed a suit against Costco's executives for causing Costco to do this illegal conduct in King County Superior Court in Washington State, where Costco is incorporated. Now, to break that down, there's 2 pieces I need to explain. One is shareholder derivative, and one is the fiduciary duty to act lawfully. So executives who run a corporation, such as Costco's executives, owe duties to their corporation that are referred to as fiduciary duties. The most well-known duties you might have heard of are the duty of loyalty and the duty of care. The duty of loyalty basically says, put your company's interests first. So if somebody approaches you and says, oh, I have a really cool deal for your company, you should take the deal back to your company. You shouldn't say, what if you just give that deal to me personally and not share it with the company? That's the duty of loyalty. Then the duty of care is basically to say that executives should be careful with their company's money and things that affect the company. So the executives shouldn't put all the company's money into cryptocurrency and then forget the code to the cryptocurrency and lose it all. One duty that people talk about less is the duty to act lawfully. So this is a duty that says don't make your company violate the law. I think the reason people don't talk about it a lot is that it probably just seems obvious to most people that you shouldn't make your company violate the law. And in most cases, companies don't violate laws, at least not knowingly. But with animal cruelty, as I was pointing out, there's this rampant issue of companies just not caring at all that what they're doing is animal cruelty. And so if an executive has an idea for how their company could make more money, but that idea is illegal, then by promoting that idea, the executive is actually hurting the company, is what the duty to act lawfully says. An example I like to give is, let's say you run a cigarette company, and you're thinking, we can make even more money by selling heroin. You're not actually being a good executive by having your company sell heroin. You're violating your duty to act lawfully. Because if the company could talk, it would say, I don't want to break the law. I want to make money lawfully. And so that's the duty to act lawfully. So we felt that Costco's executives, by causing Costco to continue breeding birds to grow so big, so fast, they couldn't stand, that they were hurting Costco and violating their duty to act lawfully. Now, the second piece is shareholder derivative. So normally when somebody hurts a company, the people who run the company, especially the board, decide whether the company would sue. So let's say that I were to go to Costco and shoplift. The board could decide whether to sue me. And they might decide, oh, she only stole $5 worth of goods. A lawsuit's going to cost us $5,000. Let's just let it slide. And they'd be allowed to make that decision. But sometimes executives, especially board members, can't be trusted to make a decision about who the company should sue. So let's say all of Costco's board members decided to get together and go on a shoplifting spree to Costco. Hypothetically, they would not do that. I'm not trying to accuse them of that. But if they were to do that, they could not then get together and decide that Costco shouldn't sue them because they have a vested interest in not being sued because they're the ones that did the wrong thing. And so this doctrine has been developed called shareholder derivative, which says that anytime somebody hurts a corporation, if the board can't be trusted to make a decision about who to sue, a shareholder can step into the shoes of the corporation and make the corporation sue. So let's say you are a shareholder in Costco, you hear that the board all got together and shoplifted, and that the board doesn't want to sue, you could say, as Costco's shareholder, I want to make Costco sue. Putting these together, we had two shareholders who were concerned about Costco's treatment of animals. There were people who bought shares in Costco not knowing what Costco was going to do to animals, and they wanted to sue Costco's executives for causing the company to illegally neglect chickens. So the case got a lot of press. It was in the Washington Post, Fox Business, CNN Business, Meeting Place, a viral TikTok. We had a hearing. This is a drawing my mom did of the hearing. It was over Zoom, so there's 3 different images. Unfortunately, the judge ended up dismissing the case. The good news was that the judge agreed with us that Costco's board did know about how birds were being treated and seemed to accept the theory that if executives make a company violate the law, then shareholders can sue the executives. Unfortunately, the judge didn't agree that breeding chickens to grow so big so fast they can't reach water counted as neglect, because the judge said, well, there is food and water in the barns, that's enough. So we disagree, but the judge gave us an avenue for what we could do, which is to file an official demand on Costco's board, asking them to look into their animal welfare practices. So we filed that. And unfortunately, the last we heard, the board has decided not to make any changes. So it wasn't the outcome we wanted, but we are happy that it shows that this proof of concept is proved, and that if an executive causes a company to violate the law, a shareholder can sue the company, including if the violation is animal cruelty. Okay, so now I just want to tell you about legal impact for chickens, our backstory. Steen said wanting to know about Conrad and Zeke offline, but you're going to have to know about at least Conrad right now. So this is Conrad. When I was 11 years old, my parents bought him for me as a present. He was a cockatiel, and he was really cool. I had him for 22 years, and he totally changed my life. When I first got him, I didn't know that birds, I didn't really know anything about birds. I didn't even realize that they were warm or that they had feelings. And the first thing that struck me was just feeling his body and that he was warm like a mammal. And then I was struck by how opinionated he was. He would really want to be in the same room as people, especially me, and he would scream if we left him alone. He made up words for things. So whenever I had water, he would go, what? And then I would give him the water. And so then I eventually learned when he makes that sound, it's his way of saying, I want water. He was just like really cool and obviously sentient. When he was upset, he would scream. When he was happy, he would either sing or grind his beak gently or close his eyes and put his head down and let me pet him. And later, when I learned about how birds are treated in the food industry, I found it really disturbing to think about my beloved Conrad, who's the closest relationship I've ever had with anyone. I would never want him to be treated that way. And then I also realized that most people haven't had a close relationship with a bird. And so most people don't immediately have that visceral reaction to hearing about a bird being hurt that I was lucky enough to be able to have. So that's why I decided I wanted to dedicate my life to advocating for chickens. Well, that plus the fact that there's 9 billion chickens killed for food in the US every year and that they have such bad lives. And so it feels like a really important area to go into. I founded Legal Impact for Chickens in 2021. At first, it was just me, but now we're a team of 4. We have a really cool staff attorney called Catherine Evans. We have a legal operations specialist, Sage Max, and we have a equal justice fellow, Isabella Nielsen. And we're hiring. So if you're interested, let me know or go to our website. Jordan asked me to say if there were, say, lessons that Lick has learned from our work. So I thought about it a little, and here are some lessons. The first one is about the existence of whistleblowers and how powerful they can be to help animals, and that the animal movement should tap into them more. So when I first became an animal advocate, I thought that people who work in animal agriculture just don't care about animals, and that's the problem. And the more that I've gotten to know people who work in animal agriculture, the more I realize that is not true. A lot of them care about animals a lot, and a lot of them are really upset by what they see happening around them all the time. So the way we learned this was that after we filed the Costco case, somebody reached out to us and said, I worked at a Costco factory farm and I saw really horrible things happening and I want to talk to you about it. And then that kind of thing kept happening. Like, since starting Lick, we've had multiple people from the industry reach out to us. Somebody who worked in a slaughterhouse, other people who've been contract growers, and people who've worked in stores where chickens are sold, people who've worked in the dairy industry. And all these people, basically, they just got a job because they needed a job. And then they're seeing horrible suffering. They're being told to do things they feel bad about. And they're doing what they have to do to make money, but they don't like it. And also, I learned that a lot of people in the chicken meat industry in particular are very unhappy at work in general. A lot of contract growers feel like they're not treated well, and I agree, by the big integrators like Tyson that control the industry. And a lot of employees at slaughterhouses are really, really treated badly, like having their legal rights violated a lot. So I think this is something that is powerful to helping animals, and that we should be working together with people who are in the industry and have concerns. So Legal Impact for Chickens was lucky enough to be able to partner with a cool EA nonprofit called Good Impressions that put out ads online for us that have been attracting more whistleblowers, and it's something we definitely want to keep leaning into in the future, is just realizing that people in the industry have information and concerns and can help. And then the other thing is that there are avenues to address cruelty. So when I started Lick, we were hoping that there would be ways you could get cruelty into court, even if police and prosecutors aren't gonna want to prioritize it. And I feel like our work so far has showed that that is possible. You may not always win, but hopefully we will eventually win. And at least there's viable avenues that are worth continuing to pursue. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate each of you, and animals are really lucky to have you thinking about them.
Such good time management. We have time for questions.
Yes. Well, you are the one who told me not to do the appendix.
There is an appendix. Okay, so I'm going to ask you some of the things that I think are on your appendix.
Great.
So you can still talk about them. Alexander Dairy. I know nothing about them. You did a lawsuit.
Yeah. So this is in our appendix. Legal Impact for Chickens versus Alexander. So Alexander Dairy is a dairy that sells milk at Whole Foods throughout the United States. And unfortunately, it has a reputation for neglecting animals. And speaking of whistleblowers, the reputation is so bad that multiple people who work in the dairy industry or in animal agriculture have been concerned. So this is a rare case that Lick brought that was not based on an undercover investigation. It was just based on people who were associated with this dairy speaking out. So earlier this year, the nonprofit Farm Forward released a report about what was going on at Alexander. And some of the things in the report were things that that Farm Forward observed itself. But the reason Farm Forward knew to look into Alexander was that multiple people who had worked there or bought cattle from them spoke up saying that they're really freaked out by what's going on at this dairy. It's not funny, I'm just laughing because it's so disturbing. So the dairy had been caught putting salt in animals' eyes on purpose, covering animals' eyes with patches so that people couldn't see that the cows had cancer, selling sick cows at slaughter, and depriving cows of food. And this is in California, which has really strong animal cruelty laws. So when we saw all this, our first thought was like, this can't be true. Then we read more about it and did some background research and determined that it is true. And so we are suing them under this really cool California law called California Corporations Code Section 10404. And this is one of these special laws that lets you sue civilly for violation of a criminal law. So it says that any society for the prevention of cruelty to animals that's incorporated under California law can sue anyone who violates any law relating to animals. And Legal Impact for Chickens happens to be a society for the prevention of cruelty to animals incorporated under California law. So we just filed this lawsuit, and we're waiting to see how Alexander responds.
How long does such a process generally take? Like, when is the next step? How is that decided? How long will this play out, and what can they do in the meantime?
It is a long process, probably. I mean, it depends, but lawsuits in general in the US, I think that probably most of them take around 3 years, but some of them can take 10 years or longer, and some of them can be very short, usually if a defendant just doesn't show up to court and then the plaintiff wins by default, or if the parties settle right away. In this case, the next step is us waiting for the defendants to file either an answer or a motion to dismiss. An answer would be a document where they go through everything we're accusing them of and say whether or not they admit that they did it. And then a motion to dismiss would be where they argue that even if they did the things that we accuse them of, they have some reason that they don't think they should be liable. And the time of when it's due is, I can't remember off the top of my head. I know that we gave them an extension, though. Often a lawyer will reach out and say, can we have an extension? And then you should say yes to be nice, because you're going to want them to give you an extension at some point.
Okay. Okay, I'll look at as I pull up the swap cart, I'll ask you a different question too. I imagine that there are also positive second order effects of the work that you're doing, and potentially also risks to what you're doing. How are there ways for you to amplify the positive side effects of doing legal impact work, and also how do you mitigate potential risks?
Yeah, so the positive and the risk are very similar to each other. Both of them are precedent. So if in the US legal system, when a judge makes a ruling, that often is precedent, meaning that other judges have to or can follow that ruling. And so in the US, law can be made via lawsuits. It's called case law, or common law. This is something that exists in some countries that are called common law countries, but not so much in countries that are referred to as civil law countries. So in the US, anytime you bring a lawsuit, you might end up creating precedent. And you could create good precedent or bad precedent. So good precedent is when the precedent says that what you wanted to say, like, it is cruel to treat animals a certain way, or it is possible to sue somebody in a certain way. And bad precedent would be if a court were to write a ruling that was binding in other courts that said, no, it is okay to treat animals this way, or no, you can't sue people who treat animals this way. So we are hoping that not only will we win these cases and help the animals, but that it would create precedent that helps other animals. And then at the same time, we are afraid that if we lose the cases, we could be creating precedent that makes it harder for us and other lawyers to help other animals. And the best way to address this, in my opinion, is basically just to do a really good job. So first of all, try to be really thoughtful about what cases you bring, and only bring cases that are really solid, where you know that you should win. Whether or not you actually will win, you should really believe in the case and feel that if you were the judge, you would roll for your side. And then the second thing is to try to do a really good job litigating the case. Make sure you really understand all the facts and have investigated it thoroughly. Make sure you really understand all the law and have thought through all the different legal arguments. Make sure you have really good lawyers. If there's a specialized area of law, like when we did our Costco shareholder derivative case, we worked with a shareholder derivative lawyer. So work with a specialist, and if there's uh, try to have lawyers on your team that know the venue that you're going to be in. So we always try to work with local counsel that are in the state or even the county that we're going to be in if we're in a county um, where we're already barred. And the reasons that you want to do a really good job are, first of all, it increases your likelihood of winning and decreases your likelihood of losing. And then, second of all, even if you end up winning or losing either way, how good of a job you did could still affect the precedent you get. So, judges have power over the way that they create precedent with a ruling. For example, if a judge loves you 100%, but wants to rule against you, they can say, no, in this particular case, we're ruling against you because there was water in the barns, but in general, we think this is a promising avenue. And like, it's concerning what happened in the factory farm, and it's like the kind of lawsuit that could succeed in the future. And then that precedent is not as scary because if you want to do another case and you cite that precedent, or if your opponent cites that precedent, you can say, yeah, but this is that future case that the judge said could work. Whereas if the judge really hates you and feels like you are wasting his time and you don't really care about the legal system and you're just trying to like make a scene, the judge could go above and beyond to say like, not only am I ruling against you, but every single one of your arguments is wrong, and nobody would ever be right if they did anything at all like this. So basically, judges have a lot of discretion in the way they rule, even when they've decided who they're ruling for. Even like the order in which they make their decisions can affect things. So if a judge knows if there's 3 elements you have to prove, and they know you're gonna lose on element 3, they can just say you lose on element 3, and that's it. Or they can say you lose on element 1, you also lose on 2, and you also lose on 3. And like, which way they go about it will impact how bad the precedent is. So, yeah, our approach is just try to do a really good job.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that there were um, among the bad presidents different levels that could still be leveraged. Let's see. Okay, so you just mentioned shareholders. You also mentioned earlier with stakeholder one with Costco. How can shareholders use their stock to help animals?
If anybody here has stock in any meat or egg companies, please come up and talk to me or swap card me or message info@legalimpactforchickens.org, because shareholders in companies have this unique power to be plaintiffs in shareholder derivative lawsuits. And really, anyone who's involved in a company in any way has a lot of power to influence things. So I guess similarly, if somebody works in a factory farm or works in an animal agriculture company, please reach out. But I guess I thought that would be less likely to run into those people here than people who own shares. Yeah, if you're a shareholder, you technically are an owner of the company, and that gives you magical powers.
Cool. Is there work being done with labor protection policy unions in order to sue companies rather than individual workers over cruelty?
That is a really good question. I like that idea. I mentioned when I was talking about our team that we have a fellow who's an Equal Justice Works fellow, Isabella Nielsen, and she's specifically focusing on the intersection between the mistreatment of workers and the mistreatment of animals in animal agriculture. So I feel like this is an idea I should bring back to her. I guess I would say I don't really know of anything like that that's happening, but I think it's a really good idea because the more I get to know people in the industry, the more I feel like workers' interests and animals' interests are actually aligned, in that workers don't want to see animals suffering. And often the problem is not having enough staff. So hiring more staff would be something that workers would like and also would be better for animals. And what you just said, workers don't want to be blamed when something does go wrong. And right now, companies constantly blame workers when things go wrong, even if the companies are actually to blame.
So, good question, Madeline. Maybe if you're in this audience and you have further ideas about that, follow up with Alene here. Okay. What are the primary bottlenecks for increasing the quantity and efficacy of these lawsuits? Talented and skilled lawyers, funding, something else? This person is giving you a great
Yeah.
fundraising pitch here.
Oh, yeah.
Oppor-
Definitely, if you all want to donate, that would be very cool. And probably some of you already did donate, and I very much appreciate it. But I would say that the bottleneck fluctuates because whenever we feel like there's one bottleneck, we put all of our effort into it. So at first, I thought that the lack of evidence of cruelty was going to be our main bottleneck, and that's why we sponsored the Foster Farms undercover investigation. But right now, we have a bunch of evidence of cruelty, and there's other bottlenecks. So I think right now, I would say that the bottleneck is hiring, trying to find really, really smart lawyers who are super passionate about helping animals and want to do litigation. And the reason that that's a bottleneck, I think, is because, first of all, just like I was saying that most people don't understand chickens, most people aren't focused on animals as their life goal, helping animals. So the people who do have that as a life goal, or at least who are, I guess, people who care about effective altruism and therefore care about anyone who's suffering, even an animal, that's a very limited set of people. And then in that set, the number who are lawyers is even smaller. And then sadly, it's not just that we need lawyers, we need like brilliant lawyers because the stuff we're trying to do is hard. So, a lot of litigation is based on a template where if somebody discriminates you based on your race at work, you could go to a lawyer who's brought many different racial discrimination cases that have almost the exact same complaint, and they can just plug in the new facts. But when so few people have done animal cruelty lawsuits before us, we aren't usually able to like plug in facts. That's something we want to be able to do eventually. We want to have like templates for how you would do these lawsuits. But right now, if you're a lawyer, your job is to kind of create the templates for other people to use. So that's why we need like brilliant lawyers who are into helping chickens.
Besides brilliance, how much does it matter what the reputation is of a lawyer? If someone is famous for all kinds of other things, is that would that help, or does it matter what the resume looks like of a lawyer?
That's a good question. In my opinion, it doesn't matter. I've heard other people say that it does, but I guess I think that most judges probably aren't paying too much attention to who the lawyer is, other than checking if they know the lawyer or not. And if you know judges, that's great. But for animal law, we have to take opportunities wherever they are. So it ends up being all over the country. So it's unlikely you would get to practice too often before judges you know, even if you do know a lot of judges. So other than that, I don't really think that a judge generally cares about the lawyer's reputation. I think they're mostly just seeing if they're convinced by the arguments intellectually, and also if emotionally they find what the lawyer is saying resonant. I mean, I'm not saying judges are perfectly rational, but I don't know that they look too much at someone's resume. That said, I have heard people say that they've heard of judges caring about that, but I've not heard of firsthand of a judge caring about the resume of the person before them.
Okay. I'll do one more question. I'll try to read it slowly, deep if I'm not representing it right. Follow up. If the law needs to be the same for cats and chickens, would it follow that the judge would not have convicted a cat guardian who had water there but neglected an injury that kept the cat from the water? Or presumably the law is being unfairly and unequally applied?
I think it's being unfairly and unequally applied.
That was a quick answer.
Well, yeah, this is something I thought about a lot, and I think I even said that to the judge. I think I might have even said, well, if a person has a dog in a cage and there's water outside of the cage, are you saying that that's good enough? And then I think he was like, but they weren't in a cage, they just couldn't walk to it. And then I didn't have a chance to be like, well, what if the dog couldn't walk? So I really doubt that he would have said it was okay to breed a dog to not be able to walk and then let them die from thirst and hunger. But I don't know.
I think I will leave it here so that there's enough time for everybody to walk to their next meeting. There are maybe a couple questions in here that you can look at. Maybe you have time to review them. For those of you who have questions that didn't get answered, I'm sure you're welcome to connect with Alene on Swapcard. Thank you for introducing us to Conrad. Thank you for doing the work that you do. Thank you for talking here. And thank you to all of you for caring about this work. One more hand of applause for Alene, please.